Hello and welcome to my channel. Rhino here. Today, I'm looking at a video from Kirb Ministries, which is an organization that I'm sure that I've covered before, though I can't seem to find any of my own videos on them. I know I've been aware of them for a while, but maybe I just never got around to it? Anyway, here we are, and well, I can't say for certain that I have covered that specific channel directly. This guy's voice reminds me of Neil Gaiman narrating one of his audiobooks, and I know that I've made a joke about that before, so I suspect that this is the same guy who narrated that video from the channel Jesus Film that I responded to back in November of 2022. So I'll just pretend like I knew that back then, and just say that that's what I was thinking when I said I had covered this organization before. But that's all completely irrelevant, so let's look at the video!
I am going to get some hate for this video because the world is not 4.5 billion years old, and this is why.
Well, I wouldn't say you're going to get hate for this as much as you're just demonstrably wrong about this.
So fast is the erosion of these cliffs that in December 2023, some of the residents lost their sheds, gardens, and entire houses to the retreating cliff edge. So, if you're an atheist, you solve my problem for me. If the Earth really is billions of years old, and if there are places quite literally all around the world, just like Hemsby, which are receding quicker than my hairline, how is it that we have any land left?
That's your opening argument? Geez, that's bad. You do know that when erosion happens, the bits of land that are eroded don't just disappear from existence, right? The sediment that was eroded from that spot got transported to another spot. Well, I mean, realistically, the ocean is a really big place, so that specific sediment is likely still in transit, but eventually it will be deposited somewhere. This would be like me pointing to a river delta, a place where sediment that is being transported in the river is continuously being deposited, causing the land to stretch out farther into the sea, and then asking, if the Earth really is billions of years old, and there are places like this river delta all over the Earth that are growing quicker than my dad bod belly, how is it that we have any ocean left?
Arches National Park has 2,000 rock arches, and I quote, their explanation for this is because millions of years of erosion and weathering are responsible. However, something isn't quite adding up here, because between the years 1977 and 2015, the park rangers have reported that 43 of these rock arches have collapsed, due to further erosion, they say. So if you do the maths, that's on average 1 per year. So here's my big question. If the Earth was even 100,000 years old, how would we have any left?
Well, as they get more eroded, they become less sturdy. So before they eroded into arches, they were much more sturdy. So as time goes on and more erosion happens, the chances that an arch will collapse in any given year goes up. And that aside, there are more still being formed. Layers of sandstone become exposed as erosion happens. Those layers get eroded into tall fins, and those fins get eroded into arches. There are still fins that have not become arches, but potentially will in the future.
Of course they can't take millions of years to form, but it actually seems more likely that they are 4,000 years old, which of course makes sense.
You say that of course makes sense, but you haven't explained why it makes sense. How did you figure out that they formed 4,000 years ago using this information? Even if you assume a constant rate about 1 arch collapse per year for that entire duration, how did you determine the total number of arches that were originally present? How did you account for the formation of new arches in your calculation? Seems to me that you've made a lot of assumptions here specifically to get you to that magical 4,000 years old number rather than just looking at the data.
If you believe, like me, that they were formed after the biblical account of Noah's flood.
Oh, I see. It makes sense if you believe in the physically impossible mythological event from a book that was written by a culture that didn't know the Earth was a sphere. Okay, well, I suppose I can't argue with that.
Come on, let's be honest with one another. It's no secret that the most quoted line from the atheist is this: the burden of proof is on you.
I don't know that is the most quoted line. I mean, it's certainly not one that I often use. I don't like that style of argumentation because it basically amounts to, if we follow the rules of a formal debate or a courtroom, then I win by default because of a technicality. Real life doesn't really work that way. In real life, you are making a claim. The only time you need to bring supporting evidence to the table is if you actually care about convincing the other person of your claim. Now, specific to the atheism versus theism topic, this does usually work in effectively the same way as saying that theists are making a claim, so they have the burden of proof. Most atheists don't actually care whether or not you believe in God. They just want you to leave them alone and not try to use legislation to force them to conform to the dictates of your religion. But as a YouTuber whose entire job involves making videos speaking out against religion, usually specifically Christianity, and usually specifically the subset of Christianity that is young earth creationism, it wouldn't really make sense for me to adopt the same position. Otherwise, I'd spend every video just saying, I'm not convinced, more evidence required, rather than going to great lengths to explain exactly why it is that I'm not convinced, and even making videos that take on the burden of proof in an effort to convince others of my position. Realistically, though, my goal here is not to maximize how many people deconvert from Christianity. Ultimately, I just want the same thing as the common atheist, namely to get religious people to stop trying to force others to conform to their religion through legislation. I just happen to think that this goal is best accomplished through a variety of means, of which making videos like mine are but one. And as small an impact as I am likely to have in the grand scheme of things, it's the one that I happen to be fairly decent at, so it's what I do.
Well, I'm okay if you want to say that, because I want to say to you, Mr. or Mrs. Atheist, just open your eyes. Look at the beautiful world around you, and if you look at pretty much any landmark, you will see evidence that the Earth is young.
I like how he flashed through a bunch of human-constructed landmarks when saying that. Most of the shit that humans have built that is still around was built in the last 10,000 years or so, and of the ones that he showed, the Sphinx in particular disproves the point that he's trying to make here. It was most likely built sometime in the 4th dynasty of Egypt, between 2613 and 2494 BCE, with the only disagreement being from some Egyptologists who think that it is actually older than that. The flood supposedly happened around 2348 BCE, a century and a half later than the latest possible date for the Sphinx. The fact that the Sphinx is still standing definitively proves that there was no worldwide flood, at least not on the timeline accepted by most young Earth creationists.
Niagara Falls, on average, goes back 1 foot every year. So why is it that it hasn't cut through 200 million feet of Earth yet, since the Pangaea supercontinent split?
Well, aside from the fact that the canyon that it cut while it receded is not uniform in composition, and so it went at different speeds during different times, it's also only 12,000 years old, so wouldn't be expected to have traveled that significant of a distance. So far, this video is suffering greatly from the common creationist problem where they can't seem to conceptualize the idea that things change, or rather, that the things that do change don't always do so at a constant rate, and so aren't permanent fixtures on the planet. Niagara Falls is moving 30 centimeters per year! So if the Earth is 4 billion years old, that's 1.2 billion kilometers it would have to travel. Erosion is happening at such and such a rate at this one specific location, so if the Earth is 4 billion years old, that location couldn't have existed, or would have been ridiculously large in the past. The moon is receding at so many centimeters per year, so are you telling me that 4 billion years ago it was orbiting from the surface of the Earth? Things like that. The moon one is actually my favorite, because the numbers don't really work for them. Assuming everything about the Earth-Moon system, including its recession rate of just under 4 centimeters per year, has been constant for the entire duration, and that the moon has been orbiting the Earth right from the formation of the Earth, then the moon would have been about 200,000 kilometers away from the Earth at its formation, which is still about 180,000 kilometers too far away for it to be a problem. But all of these have effectively the same answer. The stuff you're using to date the Earth wasn't even around at the beginning of the Earth, so no, it doesn't disprove the age of the Earth when you point out that it can't have been doing what it's doing now for billions of years. And actually, he seems to be at least partially aware of this, since he asked about Niagara Falls doing its thing since the split of Pangaea. But now I'm left wondering why he didn't use Pangaea as his measuring point for the town with the receding shoreline.
I'm going to tell you why I personally cannot buy into this idea of species to species evolution.
Well, whether or not you can personally buy into it, it is a thing that happens. And it so obviously happens that even creationist organizations admit that speciation is a thing that happens, which leaves them having to retreat to the ambiguity surrounding the word kind in order to preserve their denial of evolution in the face of overwhelming evidence that they are wrong. In fact, the evolution of new species has to be a part of the creation model in order to minimize the number of animals that Noah is required to have had on the Ark. I mean, it's still an unreasonably large number of animals that wouldn't have been possible, but it's a couple orders of magnitude less than it would have had to have been if they didn't allow for speciation.
Now, I'm not going to stand here and pretend that I'm some kind of expert. We both know that I'm not. I can barely spell my name on a good day.
I do appreciate the self-deprecating humor. It is something that I regularly engage in myself. But a part of not being an expert is learning to trust experts. When a scientific idea has as much support behind it from the scientific community as evolution, or the Earth being billions of years old, or the universe being an order of magnitude older than that, then whether we find it to be personally appealing to us or not, it makes sense to trust the experts who have spent their entire lives studying that exact thing. They probably understand it quite a bit better than we do. When I updated my stance on the functional fraction of the human genome last week, that wasn't because I ran the numbers and found the flaw in the 2017 paper that I used to cite. That's because the experts who knew what they were doing ran the numbers and found the flaw. And they did it so thoroughly and convincingly that the author of the original paper wholeheartedly agreed with their conclusion. As someone who rather enjoys performing back-of-the-envelope style calculations but is otherwise pretty garbage at math and statistics, I don't have the relevant knowledge to oppose the changing of the conclusion in that one, so I updated my position based on the latest information that I have from the people who do have the relevant knowledge. Now, this doesn't mean that I just blindly accept something that an expert says because an expert said it. I'd be flip-flopping on young Earth creationism constantly if that was how it worked, because they do have the occasional credentialed expert on their side. But when looking through papers, it's helpful to look for conflicts. Usually with specific conclusions, there is uncertainty and debate in the scientific community, so my approach is to zoom out, look at the broader issue, see if there's something that they all mutually agree on, and then use the individual studies on the subjects where the consensus might not be as clear, while keeping an eye out for future studies that could either overturn or support the conclusions of the studies that I use. So as for evolution, it is a thing that all biologists agree happens and is the explanation for the diversity of life. So yeah, we might find one paper that concludes that 80% of the human genome is functional, another that found that no more than 15% could be functional, and a third that agrees that the 80% number is likely too high, but that we are still uncertain as to the percentage that is functional, but it might be higher than 15%. All of the authors in these studies agree that evolution is real. They just disagree about one specific, tiny aspect of it. All this to say, trust the experts, but not blindly.
But here's the reason why I'm not about to jump onto the evolution bus in any hurry. The reason is this: they still haven't found the missing link.
Well, definitionally, it wouldn't be a missing link if we found it, now would it? That aside, there have been plenty of steps in human evolutionary history that we have found. The trouble is, every one link that we do find yields two more that are missing, because evolution is so gradual and fossilization is so rare that the chances of us actually finding a completely unbroken evolutionary sequence represented in the fossil record are effectively zero. But at this point, there is enough evidence for evolution that is completely independent of the fossil record that it wouldn't matter if we had zero links. Evolution would still be at the foundation of our understanding of biology.
So, just stop me if I get something wrong, but if we really did evolve from a common ancestor, you'd expect us to find millions and millions of these pre-human fragments and bones in the ground.
Not necessarily. Approximately 1.7 to 2.5 billion individual T-Rexes have lived according to population modeling, and we have less than 100 fossils from them. I'm having trouble finding the total population estimates, but Homo erectus, one of the so-called missing links of our ancestry, existed for about 2 million years, and we have hundreds of fossils from them. It seems as though we actually have more fossils from our hominid ancestors than we do for any individual species of dinosaur, but I don't hear you claiming that dinosaurs don't exist because of a lack of fossil evidence. I suspect that the reason we find a relative abundance of hominid fossils is merely a matter of time. They've only been in the ground for a few million years, as opposed to the tens of millions of years for the dinosaurs, so there has been less time for them to be destroyed by geologic processes.
You'd expect to see them all around the world.
No, we'd expect to see them where they lived. So mostly Africa, some Asia, some Europe. But yeah, hominid species that are older than 2 million years are entirely found in Africa.
And yet, we only have a handful.
A pretty big handful, all things considered.
And the ones that we do have, can I say this? They look a little sketchy when you dig a little deeper.
You can say that all you like, but the only thing that could really be called sketchy about them, and this isn't really a sketchy thing, but I could see how it would lead someone to think that it's sketchy, is how frequently fossils from one ancient hominid species are misidentified as belonging to a different ancient hominid species. And of course, this happens because evolution is real and they are so closely related. If the whole created kinds thing was real, then we wouldn't expect to find any other species of human in the fossil record, yet there are at least 13 species of human that have been found. Each one of them could have been called the missing link at one point or another, but then we found them and thus created a new missing link.
If your elitist East Coast evolution is real, why has no one found the missing link between modern humans and ancient apes?
We did find it. It's called Homo erectus.
Then you have proven my case, sir. For no one has found the link between apes and this Homo erectus.
Yes, they have. It's called Homo habilis.
Aha! But no one has found the missing link between ape and the so-called Homo habilis.
Yes, they have. It's called Australopithecus africanus.
Oh, I've got you now.
And worth mentioning here is the fact that, no, we don't actually know whether any of the previous species that we have found were actually our direct ancestors, with the exception of some of the modern human populations whose genomes contain bits of Neanderthal and or Denisovan DNA. The fact is that fossilization is such a rare occurrence that the chances are that the actual ancestor species of humanity have gone completely undetected, but they would have been similar to the ones that we have found. It's a fairly minor technicality to be sure.
You are technically correct. The best kind of correct.
But the misconception that the fossils we have found are believed by scientists to actually be our ancestors is often used by creationists to argue against evolution, so it's worth getting these minor technicalities correct.
You may want to write this down because Professor Stephen J. Gould...
Okay, are we gonna keep pretending that anything this guy says from here on out should be taken in any way seriously? Like, I know it's coming, not from watching ahead, I actually haven't done that with this one yet, but I guarantee you it's one of the quotes from Gould about how evolution couldn't happen gradually, because he spent most of his career arguing for punctuated equilibrium. But the bit about how evolution happens through punctuated equilibrium will be left off. That's pretty standard creationist tripe. But this dude couldn't even be bothered to get his name right. Like, I would be hard-pressed to find a way to write his name that would be more wrong than this, while still being clear whose name it was I was attempting to write. It was Stephen, with a PH, not a V. His middle name was J, it was not a part of his last name. And his last name is Gould, not Gold. So, not Stephen J. Gould, but Stephen J. Gould. I know that mistakes happen, Lord knows I've made a fair share myself, but my confidence that this guy put in enough work to fully understand whatever quote is about to show up is extremely low, given that he couldn't even be arsed to put in the effort to make sure he had the name of the guy saying it correct.
A non-Christian paleontologist and the author of many books on why evolution is great, many books on biology.
Oh, for fuck's sake, you have pictures of his book covers with his name spelled correctly in massive letters right there in your own goddamn video. Like, even if you just flubbed the line delivery, or if you had it wrong in your script and then found out when looking for pictures to put up, what you said was close enough that if you had just spelled it correctly in your last image, I would have thought it was a bit odd the way you said it, but then given it a pass. It maybe would have garnered a passing joke, possibly with an accompanying outtake of me flubbing some other easy-to-say line, as can often be found at the end of my videos, but you actually typed those letters into your video editor and then immediately followed it up with posting images of the book with his goddamn name right on it, spelled differently than how you did it. Now, Off the Kirb Ministries has over 2 million subscribers, so I expect that it's not the presenter doing the editing, but that actually makes it worse. It wasn't just one guy making an understandable mistake, it was probably at least 3. The person who wrote it wrong in the script, the presenter who read that script without knowing any better so didn't correct it, and then the editor who physically typed the incorrect name into their video editing software, and then typed probably that same name into Google, saw Google's "did you mean" thing correcting them, actually had to correctly spell the name in order to get images of the book covers, since there is a guy named Stephen J. Gould who wrote a book on the philosophy of law whose book cover comes up if you spell it the way you have it, and then neglected to go back and correct it after inevitably learning the correct way of spelling it. But putting all of that to the side, which, to be clear, it might not on its own be reason to dismiss whatever they're about to say, but definitely points to them not caring about making sure they are accurately presenting the points that they are arguing against, but ignoring all that, just think about what you said before you quote Gould. He's a non-Christian paleontologist, the author of many books on why evolution is great, and many books on biology. And you're selling him short. He wasn't just a paleontologist, he was also an evolutionary biologist, historian of science, and co-developer of the theory of punctuated equilibrium, the idea that organisms and ecosystems tend to enjoy long periods of evolutionary stability, followed by bouts of relatively rapid evolution. Of course, you can't admit to that last bit, because I can pretty much guarantee that whatever quote you're about to pull will leave out the context that it's written within a discussion of whether evolution happens through punctuated equilibrium or gradualism, the idea that evolution is always moving forward at a very slow but steady pace.
Even he admits that most hominid fossils, even though they serve as a basis for endless speculation and elaborate storytelling, are fragments of jaws and scraps of skulls.
Oh wow, you're not even going to the punctuated equilibrium debate for quote mine Gould. Okay, well, you're citing Evolution News as your source for this quote, which is a super sketchy anti-evolution website. They cite this source as coming from Gould's 1980 book, The Panda's Thumb. In context, this quote is an aside at the end of a paragraph talking about the discovery of the Lucy specimen. It's not bemoaning the poor state of our record of early hominids, it's marveling at how amazing it was to find a skeleton that was 40% complete. And remember, this is from a book published in 1980. Paleontology has continued to make new discoveries since then. And in fact, just 4 years after its publication, the Turkana boy specimen was found, which is a nearly entirely complete Homo ergaster skeleton. It actually remains the most complete early hominid skeleton to have been discovered thus far, though we have found a few others, as well as a bunch more skulls, jawbones, and several other miscellaneous bones. But the fact that we have a bunch of skulls and jaws is really all that is needed to determine that they are not only not the same species as us, but show a clear evolutionary progression.
In other words, evolutionists are doing the exact thing that they attribute to creationists like me. They are building huge narratives around a tiny piece of evidence just to support their theory.
Gould doesn't clarify exactly what he was referring to with the endless speculation and elaborate storytelling line, but if I had to guess, I'd say it was a jab at science journalists' penchant for trying to paint vivid pictures that will get more readers engaged with the story, even if they don't entirely rely on data when painting their pictures. Because that is a thing that happens in science journalism. The journalists will take the most attention-grabbing aspect of a study or finding, blow it out of proportion, or ignore the section of the paper that describes the limitations of their work, and act as though it's a monumental find that will revolutionize whatever industry it's relevant to. You see this a lot with cancer research. There will be some headline about some brand new treatment that has been found to very effectively kill cancer cells in a petri dish, but they'll downplay the in a petri dish aspect in order to hype up the new treatment that kills 99% or whatever of cancer cells. Meanwhile, pouring bleach in the petri dish will also kill cancer cells, but nobody is advocating for... Well, shit, those miracle mineral solution guys do that, don't they? God damn it. Don't use bleach to cure your cancer. It kills cancer cells in a petri dish because bleach just fucking kills everything. Fire. Fire will kill cancer cells in a petri dish. I'm fairly certain that nobody's advocating for self-immolation as a cure for cancer. Black salve comes close, but it does chemical burns, not fire burns, so I think that one's safe. I mean, not safe. Safe as in, it's safe to say that nobody's advocating for self-immolation as a cure for cancer. Fuck. Charlatans who take advantage of desperate people to grift them out of their money make me angry. Anyway, I'm skipping a bit where he describes Java Man. It's very long and it works out to the skeleton seems human and the brain case is a size that falls within the human range, which is true. Modern human brains typically range from 975 to 1500 cubic centimeters, and Homo erectus, of which Java Man is a representative, averages around 1000 cubic centimeters, which is in that range. But there's a whole host of differences that make it clear that they are a separate species. To quote an article from Nature Education that explains not only the differences between Homo sapiens and Homo erectus, but also the difference between Homo sapiens that lived at the same time as Homo erectus and modern Homo sapiens. So when comparing them to Homo erectus, Homo sapiens have a more rounded and high cranium, a reduced supraorbital torus, the lack of a postorbital constriction, a less angled occipital torus, a cranium that is widest at the top of the parietals rather than at the base, a chin, and a cranial capacity of about 1350 cc. The guy from Off the Kirb Ministries does basically the same with Neanderthals after that, and yeah, basically the same points apply there, but with different specifics. So with that out of the way, let's see what he brings up next.
Meet Lucy. Lucy is probably one of the most famous examples that the evolutionist will hold up when they say we want to prove the missing link.
Funny you should say that, because in the part of the book where you were quoting Stevie Jagger, he was literally in the process of describing the difficulty that scientists were having classifying Lucy. Some features were such that a classification of non-human ape seemed warranted, while others suggested early human, and so there was a debate about whether she should be placed in the Australopithecus or Homo genus.
What they don't tell you is that in Lucy's skeleton, which is preserved at the National Museum of Ethiopia, one of the fossils, which is supposed to be part of one of the bones of Lucy, was tested and has come back as a baboon's bone.
Yes, One of the vertebral bones was found to be too small to belong to an Australopithecine, and while baboon has been said in interviews by the researchers who performed the analysis as being the closest match, it would be more proper to say that it should be categorized as belonging to an animal within the genus Theropithecus, which is represented today by a single species of baboon. And notably, the way they determined that this vertebra did not belong in an Australopithecus afarensis skeleton was by comparing it with other Australopithecus afarensis skeletons, and this comparison included all the other bones as well. As a result, one of the conclusions of the study, aside from finding one bone that didn't belong, was that the remaining 88 bones do. The reason this went undetected for so long is actually exactly because the Lucy specimen is so significant. Very few people were allowed to examine the original fossils for themselves, instead being provided casts of the fossils, and some of the key indicators that gave away the non-Australopithecine origin of the vertebrae in question would not have been evident in a cast of the fossil. On top of that, the majority of the research on Lucy has focused on the limbs, so researchers looking specifically at the limbs won't necessarily pay close enough attention to the vertebrae to notice subtle hints that one of them was out of place. To quote the research paper that made this discovery, this work does not refute previous work on Lucy or its importance for human evolution, but rather highlights the importance of studying original fossils, as well as the efficacy of the scientific method.
So, am I the only one when I hear that? It kind of makes me think, doesn't that discredit the rest of the collection?
Well, I'm sure you're not the only one who thinks that, but that doesn't make it true. In fact, it is demonstrably false, as it was a comparison with the rest of the collection that made the discovery possible in the first place. And this is explained in the article that you screenshotted to show this. So, am I insinuating that the people who couldn't be arsed to get Stanley J. Goldwyn's name correct also didn't bother to read past a headline? No, I would never insinuate such a thing. I'd just say it outright. That's exactly what happened. Either that, or they read the whole article and are just okay with lying about it.
Not only that, in all of the depictions that we see of Lucy, we see her as an upright, upward-walking being, just like us. But nowhere does any scientist ever claim to have been able to find Lucy's feet.
Well, I can't find that article in the New York Times, where you say that that quote comes from, but by searching for that exact quote, this seems to be one of those times where the various news outlets were just copying and pasting from the original source, which according to NBC was the Associated Press for this particular one, but I also can't find it on the AP website, so I'll just stick with the NBC article. This is a quote from an article that is talking about the implications of a new fossil find, an Australopithecus afarensis foot bone. So yeah, we might not have had any foot bones specifically of the Lucy specimen, but we do have foot bones from other members of her species. But this actually helps me make up my mind about whether or not you guys are too lazy to read past the headlines. You're not. You do read past the headlines. And then you selectively omit the parts of the article that don't say what you want them to say. So in this case, you ignore the headline, "Kin of famous Lucy had feet like modern humans," in order to quote mine the "no feet were found with Lucy" bit. While in the last one, you ignored the entire contents of the article in order to grab the headline, "Baboon bone found in famous Lucy skeleton." So either you guys are fine with lying, or you're just lazily copying other creationists who were doing the lying for you, including grabbing their screenshots and quotes. Also, for the record, I did find a New York Times article that was from that time period about that fossil find, but it did not contain that quote. So this seems like another instance of editorial laziness, where you knew that quote came from a news outlet but couldn't remember which one, so just guessed rather than being bothered to check. And worth mentioning is that the New York Times article goes out of its way to explain that we have known basically since we found Lucy that her species walked upright. But with the new footbone find, we can answer questions about the specifics of how she did this, like whether or not they used a grasping motion with her foot like modern non-human apes do.
And what's even crazier is that the Journal of Nature released an article which stated that they had studied Lucy's hand bones. And what did they find? They found features that are associated with knuckle walking.
I don't even know how you got there from that article. Both the article and the study it was talking about were entirely about Lucy's cause of death. And the study has what is now one of my favorite bits of technical jargon. Her cause of death was a vertical deceleration event, also known as hitting the ground when done falling. Next time one of my kids falls over and hurts themselves, I'm going to respond with, "Aw, did you experience a vertical deceleration event?" Anyway, the study suggests that this is evidence that the Australopithecus afarensis at least occasionally engaged in arboreal locomotion. It's not a very strong suggestion, as there are certainly other ways that one can die from a fall, and there are other reasons than ordinary locomotion that one might find themselves climbing a tree, and certainly there have been modern humans who have died from falling out of trees, but nobody would say that we are arboreal locomotors as a result. But it's at least not inconsistent with arboreal locomotion. Now, there are certainly studies that looked into how Australopithecus walked, but they generally don't come back with results that creationists like. Often it'll point out how certain characteristics fit in between modern humans and modern chimps, indicating a lifestyle that was a bit mixed. Sometimes they climbed trees, sometimes they walked upright, and their bone structure suggests that their upright walking was better than the modern non-human apes, but not quite as good as modern humans, being a sort of in-between. Of course, you can also find studies that do show that Australopithecus afarensis had adaptations that were useful for knuckle walking, but again, the issue is that those studies all acknowledge the fact that the species was clearly bipedal, and so this is more of an indication that the knuckle walking adaptations were a vestigial feature from a knuckle walking ancestor. Maybe they made use of it occasionally, in much the same way as modern non-human apes will sometimes walk bipedally for brief stretches, but it would have been an awkward way for them to move around, given the other adaptations that they had for bipedalism. But, I mean, you're already lying about it, so why not make the lie more believable by pulling from an article that's actually saying something close to what you're claiming, rather than one that just says she fell down and went owie?
And if you thought that Lucy's baboon bone was bad, well, that's nothing compared to the Piltdown blunder.
Okay, I'm gonna skip this one because it's so cliche at this point that it may as well be a drinking game where you do a shot every time a creationist mentions Piltdown Man, but it's still worth a brief rundown for those who might be unfamiliar. Piltdown Man was a forgery, a fake early hominid skull that was found in the UK. It was the jawbone of an orangutan combined with the skull of a modern human, both crushed and reassembled as well as being stained to look older than they were. Right from the get-go, there was serious skepticism about its validity, but the skeptics were in the minority. It fit in with the evolutionary idea at the time that, as evolution progressed, the human brain grew before the jaw shrunk, so it didn't immediately raise red flags of that nature. But as time went on, it became increasingly out of place as we discovered more and more ancient hominid fossils. It became very clear that it might have fit in with evolutionary expectations of 1912 when it was found, but it didn't fit in with what we learned about human evolution from other specimens that were legitimate. It was our increased knowledge of how humanity evolved that prompted it to be re-examined with better methods in the 1950s, at which point it was conclusively determined to be a fraud. But creationists won't tell you how we figured out that it was fake. They'll just point out that it was fake, as though that somehow serves to discredit the legitimate finds that serve to depose it. He also gets into Nebraska Man, which is even more of a nothing burger than Piltdown Man. A guy found a tooth, another guy thought it was from an ancient human, an artist from a newspaper drew an entire person based on the tooth, the scientific community didn't believe it, and on closer inspection it was a pig tooth. This one is mostly just an example of bad reporting, where a newspaper did that thing that newspapers do, and ran with a more shocking headline instead of reporting accurately. Hell, even the guy who first identified it as an anthropoid ape closely related to humans got annoyed at the drawing of an entire person from just a tooth, saying it was a figment of imagination of no scientific value and undoubtedly inaccurate. But yeah, from its initial identification in 1922 to the discovery that it was a pig tooth in 1926, the majority of the scientific community considered it to be inconclusive at best.
Why do I believe the Earth is only 6,000 years old? Well, the first thing to remember, and this will make my atheist friends right now cringe, but the first thing to remember is my first authority is the Word of God. I believe the Bible.
So, you believe that making goats look at sticks with stripes in them while they mate will cause their offspring to be striped, speckled, and spotted? Okay, you do you, I guess, but that is demonstrably not how genetics work.
Why? Because when you read the Bible, you will discover that you're not actually reading the Bible is reading you.
In Soviet Russia, Bible reads you.
It finds exactly who you are and reads right into your inner being.
Oh, is that why I'm so drawn to Ezekiel 23:20? There she lusted after her lovers, whose genitals were like those of donkeys, and whose emission was like that of horses.
And if I've shown you one thing in this video, I hope I've proved this. There are actually many holes in the theory of evolution. And Mr. Atheist, it's okay if you want to write right now in my comments section, God of the Gaps theory. Yes, that's fine. I do believe that God is the God of the gaps.
And there you have it from his own mouth. God is the God of the gaps. Now, I'm sure he was about to go on and say something that changes that from the fallacious "we don't know, therefore God" into a "God will fill the gaps in your life" or whatever, but given how they've treated the words of scientists and journalists in this video, and even the names of those scientists, like poor old Stephanie J. Goldberg-Gilbert, I feel like even my pointing out that possibility is being nicer to them than they deserve. But honestly, this video didn't even rise to the level of showing a gap in our scientific understanding. It relied entirely on misrepresentation and misunderstanding on their part. Every single thing that they brought up either has an answer that is incredibly easy to find, or their misunderstanding was so severe that they didn't even successfully describe a problem to begin with. That's it for this one. Today's comment of the day comes to us from AnnieXH2DT, who says, "God loves me. That's why he makes me work all day and night to pay my bills. I guess he knows I'll get into trouble if I have any free time." Absolutely. How's that old saying go? Idle hands are the devil's anal beads, or something? Thanks for watching. I'll be back next Friday with more, but if you need to get your Rhino fix in before then, I livestream with Cirrus every Wednesday at 8:30 Eastern and with my partner every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern on my other channel, The Watering Hole. Thanks to Tim Robertson for being my Patreon and sponsorships manager. Thanks to Steve for purchasing the Tourbox video editing macro pad thingamabob. Pieter for the SD card. Jeremy for the chair, someone who either wished to remain anonymous or for whom Amazon didn't include the little note saying who bought it for the Stream Deck XL, all of which came from my Amazon wishlist. Y'all are fucking amazing. I don't expect people to buy me shit from it, which is why I don't mention it much. So the fact that it's been nearly cleared out within a couple of weeks of the last time I promoted it is seriously moving. To borrow a biblical turn of phrase from the Song of Solomon, you have moved my bowels. And special thanks as always to my patrons, who are the Esteban John Galtz to the Simon Josh Gad, that is my channel. If you'd like to be confused for Stephen J. Gould by lazy apologist organizations, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino, or by supporting the channel in one of the other methods that can be found at links.vicerhino.com, which is also where you'll find links to my other projects. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my P.O. Box address is in the description. See you next time! Oh, don't smack the microphone. Okay, I think that's okay. Goddamn, come on, scroll. The new tablet's doing it, why can't you do it? That's right, I'm not using the new tablet yet because when I put it on my wish list, I wasn't really looking at the dimensions and it's too big to fit with my teleprompter, so now I need to buy a new teleprompter that'll fit the new tablet, but I'm testing it over here and it is working fantastically compared to that one. So, thank you for getting me the new tablet. I can't wait to actually fucking be able to use it because this one is fucking driving me crazy. So frustrating that the good one's right there. It's right fucking there. See, I got the teleprompter thing going on it so I can test it, see how it's working. It's actually working really well. Really well. Really fucking well. You're destined for the landfill, you piece of shit.
You see, the Lord God will come into your life and he will fill all of the holes.